Hey, one more thing before you go. Today, we're delving into a topic that has been shrouded in secrecy and shame far too long. You guessed it, we're exploring the profound connection between sexual energy and wealth. But it's not necessarily the wealth that you're thinking about. For generations, our sexual power has been suppressed, distorted, and misunderstood. We've carried the weight of shame, believing that our innate desires and expressions somehow tarnish our purity. But what if I told you that embracing your sexual energy is the key to unlocking a wellspring of abundance within us? Stay tuned for an enlightening conversation that will challenge your beliefs, empower your spirit, and leave you inspired to embrace your sexual essence. We're going to unlock the wealth that lies within you. Remember that your sexual energy isn't something to hide, it's your birthright. So let's embark on this transformative journey together. I'm your host, Michael Hurst. Welcome to One More Thing. Before we go, joining us today is the remarkable Alara Sage. Alara is an intuitively gifted mentor, a womb shaman, and a Shakti Activator, which we're going to talk about. She fearlessly coaches men and women, helping them heal sexual trauma, reclaim their creative life force, Shakti, and manifest their desires even in the face of obstacles. Alara believes that we are here to live ecstatically. She knows that our creative life force energy is the wellspring of pleasure, all wellness, and profound potential. So get ready to ignite your inner fire. Step into the new era of wealth, one rooted in your sexual power. Welcome to the show, Laura.
Thank you so much for having me, Michael. I'm really excited for this conversation.
So am I. What an amazing journey that your life has unfolded, I think, in regard to where you've come from and where you're at right now. And I think that what you do for individuals, especially here in our society, in the United States, I think we need that.
It's so important. And I'm so passionate about this topic because, all of it is still considered taboo. It's even sometimes still considered taboo in the spiritual community, which blows
Yeah,
my mind. And I really feel it's time for us to come back to the innocence of these topics and this power.
I think so too. We're going to have a great conversation. Talk about many things, many things. But I'd like to start at the beginning. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Grants Pass, Oregon, which is Southern Oregon. It's kind of the corner there of the west end of California. Tiny, tiny little town, amidst the mountains. The place that I actually grew up on, we had just pure BLM land, forest behind our house. So I grew up in nature, in Mother Gaia, a lot of time spent just with myself and my animals and the trees.
I can appreciate that. I didn't grow up there, but I grew up in Colorado. So we had
Mm.
the mountains and we had Pikes Peak. Actually, for most of my life, I lived in front of Pikes Peak. And then for 15 years prior to moving into Arizona, we lived up behind Pikes Peak, about 8,500 feet. And, we'd wake up and walk out to a herd of elk that were bedded down in our lot. And, they just kind of look at you like, hey, morning. How you doing? Or we also had bears in the trees, which was like, kids, stay in here for a minute. So yeah, I can appreciate that. Plus, it gave me a better appreciation growing up in an environment like that for Mother Nature and what she has to offer to us and so forth. So not as far as this part goes, no. So do you have relatives, family, friends, like anything, siblings?
I have an older brother. Yes, he's 2 years older than me.
And what was your family like, may I ask?
Yeah, absolutely. The funniest thing about my family is that they always called me an alien. I was just always very different than they were and are still to this day. As it was a big joke when I was a kid and even a teenager, and even now, probably even more now of a joke that, yeah, I must be an alien.
I sometimes sometimes parents can be cruel, but sometimes they can be fun. So I guess as an alien that works too.
Yeah, I mean, I believe that I am an alien, so it's all good.
Yes, it all works. We're all connected. So this universe is so large and vast that any one of us at any time could be one and not really know it. One of
Absolutely.
those things.
Yes.
Did you go to university?
I did not. So at the age of 19, I was, set to go to university. I was a lover of school. I've always loved learning, and I was really set to go to university. But by that time, I didn't know what I wanted to study. And everybody, that was in 1999, and everybody at that time was really getting into computers. And so computer programmer sounded like the thing to do. So I was like, sure, I'll do that. And my mother was like, what? Computer programmer? And she kept saying, like, are you sure this is what you want to do? And I said, yes, yes, yes. So I was trying to get into DeVry University. And I failed the SAT test 3 times by 10 points, which is not like me. I'm an intelligent person. And that last time I came home and I just collapsed on the floor and I just started crying. And my mother said to me, are you sure that this is what you want to do? And Michael, it was the funniest thing out of my mouth. I had never even thought about this. Out of my mouth, out of the blue came, no, I want to travel the world. And I thought my mother would just say, no, you're not doing that. You're going to go to college. But my mother said, yes, do that. You're young. This is the time. So I left the country by myself. I actually became a scuba diving instructor. I was gone for 8 years and I ended up never going to university. I just got the school of life.
Yeah, it's a University of Life. Sometimes that works better, the University of Life, and it teaches us many more things than a piece of paper hanging on the wall can teach us. I think it gives us a vast array of experience, society, culture, and experiences better sometimes than what's in a book. I mean, the people that wrote the book had to experience it first, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah, it works this way. Excuse me. How did you come to a point? I know that have you always been interested in this subject that we're about to talk about, or is that something that came to you spontaneously, or what was your childhood like, or any incidents in your life that maybe sparked an interest in this?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I was far from this topic for a long time because I was actually very sexually suppressed. I was molested by my grandfather at a very young age, and then I was further molested again by a boy. And to me, my sexual energy became something that just wasn't safe. And I had a lot of issues with women in high school, and I just learned that whatever this is not safe, and I'm just going to shut it all down. And so I didn't experience myself sexually in any pleasurable way. I was very highly sexually, lit, but like sex always was a massive disappointment to me. I didn't understand it. And it took for my spiritual awakening and this whole process for me to really come back into the pure innocence of this energy within myself.
Well, my empathy is with you in regard to your experiences as a childhood and coming up through all of that. I know that I came from a very dysfunctional family myself, and we found out secrets way, way, way later that were happening in regard to grandparents and people, at least of that era. They just didn't talk about it, and if you brought it up, it was you just don't. Period. It's just not spoken about. It's not talked about. It's pushed away in a closet, and the closet door is shut, and then a bookcase is slided up in front of it, and they won't do a thing about it. I didn't find out until probably 35 or years afterwards, somewhere thereabouts. That my grandfather, who I had at that time I grew up, he fished. He took me camping. He took me fishing. You never would have thought. And he had molested several members of the family. We had a very large family, and when one spoke, then another one spoke, and another one spoke, and it just kind of blew the persona completely out of the water because, again, those things were not talked about. Do you think we, as a society in whole, let me back up. Everybody on here, and I don't know if you know this, I'm a retired police sergeant. And I spent a career in law enforcement, and 4 years of that I worked as domestic violence in specific.
Mm.
The Domestic Violence Task Force, actually, it's a multi-agency one that we dealt with any kind of domestic violence, or whether it be to children or to spouses, boyfriends, girlfriends, husbands, wives, any kind of domestic violence. We were tasked with investigating that, and I ran into a lot of sexual issues when this took place. A lot of rape, a lot of molestation, a lot of things that were done to not only the partner but to children. And from that perspective, it gave me a I, how do I say this? Not a broader perspective, a vision of what society is doing and how it's suppressing it in some of the darker end of it. But obviously, being a cop and seeing the worst people people at their worst, the worst people at their worst, and the best people at their worst, that's what you deal with on a regular basis. You have good days, but you have a lot of bad days too in regard to that. So what I did notice was a pattern, especially when I grew up in a dysfunctional family that I grew up with, two alcoholic parents, and my mother sleeping around. Sorry, Mom, sleeping around quite a bit. It was I thought I was isolated with that when I grew up in that environment. I thought, well, this can't be happening to everybody. Do
Mm.
you think this is a societal problem that, has come from, let's say, religion? I grew up Catholic, and, Catholic, very strict Catholic. And they were very strict about certain things. And one of them was, you don't talk about sex. You don't do this, you don't do that. It's only for procreation and so forth. So where do you think shame came from? Do you think it came from the religious aspect, or do you think it comes from the familiar aspect?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it comes from both. I think religion plays a really big part of that because, just even to say that we're all born sinners. And my mother used to say to me, shame on you, which is an actual curse. She didn't know that she was cursing me. She had been taught to say that. She had had that said to her. And so she said that to me. And, to me, we believe that shame is somehow going to stop, our children and stop people from acting badly or acting poorly. So if we hold this energy of shame on top of each other, this energy of sin or this belief of heaven and hell, everybody will behave better. And it's not the truth of it, because shame is a very deteriorating energy. It is so painful to carry shame around in your body, and that pain gets projected out from you into your reality and onto other people.
It is not just from the Catholic perspective, but I know that there were many times that I investigated things like sexual assault or molestation, and within families as well as outside of that. And the first thing that was really I felt not really not sorry. I can't. That's not the right word. I empathize with these individuals because the first thing that out of their mouth most of the time was, "I'm sorry." And
Mm.
it's like, as a victim, and you're kind of going, you have nothing to be sorry about. And it took a lot of comforting, a lot of conversation, a lot of support, and bringing in support for these individuals because they felt it was their fault. They did it, and they felt shameful. They felt, I let this happen, and now I feel ashamed, and I feel this, and I feel that. I know that from from a societal perspective, as we just mentioned, I think it goes. The root of it, I do believe, I agree with you, comes from a religious perspective. And growing up Catholic, my parents got divorced, so my mother was excommunicated from the church, and then we didn't go to church because of that. And then she desperately sought out other churches in order to. And what I found across the board, and we went to Baptist, Southern Baptist, Nazarene, any church that would accept her and us, she wanted to participate in that and get into that. Later, I found out that, and I'm exposing secrets that my family probably wouldn't appreciate, but my grandfather molested my mother, and this is something
Mm.
that I did not know. for the longest time. It took me, I mean, till after she passed away before I actually heard that secret come out. And in understanding that, I felt that, now I look back on it, and her desperately trying to find recognition in the church was something that she was trying to take that shame that she felt off of her shoulders. Do you feel that there is a way out of that? I mean, do you think that we have an opportunity to kind of face that stigma? I won't call it shame because it isn't. It shouldn't be. We'll call it a stigma. How about a stigma? Is there a way to, that we can start to kind of recognize that and say, hey, wait a minute?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's always about understanding that, you know, we have to first acknowledge any shame that we feel in ourselves. And because it's such a painful energy, most people don't even realize they're carrying it around because they don't want to feel it. It hurts very deeply. But if we're willing to look at it in ourselves, like I had to face the shame that I carried in my body, and I first didn't feel it at all. But once I started really opening up to it, wow, I felt it. It was in my sexual energy, it was in my sexual power. And as I allowed myself to feel that and be with it and love myself, because that's what the energy is really going to transform shame is acceptance, because shame is the opposite of acceptance. And so when we love ourselves and accept ourselves that we have shame, accept, other people that they have shame, then we begin to heal those vibrations and we break these generational, energies that keep getting passed down. Just like I said, my mother said, shame on you, but that didn't originate with her. So we have to break these generational chains by addressing those energies in ourselves.
I think that, do you think how does shame cling to our sexual identities? I mean, we all have a sexual identity, I believe, in one form or another. How does the shame cling? Is that the right word? Cling to it?
Yeah, I think that's a great word. Our society does not create space for sexual energy. I mean, we've already kind of hinted to that, right? And it's been just generations after generations where, nobody is allowed to talk about any of this stuff. It's so taboo. And yet, it's so ironic, is it not? Because sex is what creates life. Like
Yeah.
literally, we all do the act of sex because here we are reproducing, but we're not allowed to talk about it. And we're definitely not allowed to talk about any problems or anything like that. And, this is a massive amount of control, from my opinion, because sexual energy is very powerful. Like I said, it creates life. It is a creative life force energy. And when we don't really know how to use that power, we don't know how to really powerfully create our reality. And so this has been going on generation after generation of, hey, this is not allowed. In fact, this is wrong. All of the different ways that society and different places, religions, governments have suppressed people through the projection of sexual energy. And the truth of it is our sexual energy is naturally, innately innocent. So one of the ways that I first came across this was I was shown in meditation one day my 4-year-old self. And at 4 years of age, my sexual energy came online. Now, of course, at 4 years of age, I have no desire to have sex, right? Like I don't even know what that is. But my body was lit with sexual energy. And we see this with kids, right? We see this with very young kids. They touch themselves, they're playing with themselves because it feels good in their body. They have no idea even what it means. And at 4 years of age, where that came online, I would go out into nature and I would just feel the sexual energy in my body and it felt so good. Well, my family didn't think it was so good. And they started to feel it in me. They started to see it in me. And immediately it was like, don't do that. Stop that. Knock it off. That's not okay. The shame, the shame, the shame, and the shutdown. But for us to understand, that is innocent. I mean, Gaia, look at Mother Nature, look at the animals. We all enact in this energy because it is creative life force energy. So, why are humans any different? Why are we not gifting ourselves that pleasure, that natural innate ability of ourselves?
Yeah, I agree. That's kind of a cultural conditioning. I think we as a culture have done that. We've done it for years. I remember, obviously, I'm not a really, really young guy, but watching stuff like I Love Lucy. They slept in separate beds. And I thought, well, my parents don't sleep in separate beds. Even as a kid, I'm going, that's kind of weird that they're sleeping in separate beds. And then everything you see in commercials, they didn't show women, forgive me, but they didn't show women in their bras, for example, which they do now. They didn't show anything. You'd watch a movie and you would see them, embracing. And then you'd cut to the curtain. I'm pointing, cut to the curtain blowing in the wind. And then next day, everybody's all fine and dandy. I think it was a cultural suppression of, yeah, you kind of maybe know what they did, or you did know what they did, but we're not going to show you that because we don't want you to feel that or understand it. Obviously, some things have developed profusely in that regard, especially with TV and movies and what they show on TV. But I mean, there's been generations, and like you said, intergenerations have done this over and over again. Women used to have to cover their ankles. If you showed your ankles, you were, a bad person because I won't say other words, but you know what I mean? You're a bad person because you showed your ankles, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. 4 years old, that was is that early? Is that standard or normal for a kid?
It's
About
totally
that?
normal. Yeah.
Yeah, so I remember about confession time. When I was about 8 years old, and I had friends of mine that were going, if you looked at Playboy magazine, look at Playboy. No, I don't even know what that is. They said, check under your dad's bed. Sure enough, my dad had Playboy magazines under the bed. So at 8 years old, I opened my first Playboy magazine. And it was kind of one of those things. But then the shame part came in because my dad caught me and it was like, what are you doing? Those are mine. Don't look at that. Don't touch that. You're not supposed to be doing that, kind of situation. And not saying that looking at a Playboy magazine was correct, but even from that perspective, it was like you get confused because I thought, well, you're doing it. They're under your bed, kind of a thing. My friends are doing it. So from that perspective, that kind of shame sticks with us, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, those are those moments, sometimes when we think of them from a parent to a child, we think, oh, that was no big deal. But for a child, that's a very big deal. And they stay in our nervous system. They stay in our bodies until we address it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, there are tools that we can use, and there's our techniques and methodologies, which when you're ready to get to that point, we can talk a little bit about the tools and the methodologies that we can use, or some that we can use to help us overcome some of that. But healing sexual shame, that's a journey. Do you think the majority of us have to take? How widespread do you feel that this is?
I feel like it's such a pandemic. I mean, even for people who, even when I work with both men and women, but when I work with women who, they're like, oh no, my sex life is fine. My sex life is good. And they don't think there's anything there. When we really start to communicate with the body, they are still holding on to shame. They are still not really allowing the full expression and pleasure of their sexual energy. So, and then of course it goes the flip side, people who are overtly sexually expressive, right? Because they're trying to compensate in themselves. So I think it's a massive issue in our society that just feeds itself, right? Because that shame is what feeds the very distorted energy. Like that's the reason from my perspective of why people are molesting children, of why people are raping each other. It's rooted in the shame that already exists in the sexual energy.
I can agree with you, even from a police perspective and from my investigation perspective and doing not just the domestic violence aspects of it, but as a police officer and investigator. I was an investigator for a while as well. I found that there was a lot of individuals where once we delved a little bit deeper into their back history, that what was taking place had been brought down with them through the generations. And a lot of it was because they were suppressed, or they were made to feel ashamed. They were made to feel that whatever they were doing was bad. So they come out and they did something as a spiteful type act, like a child acting out when they do something like that. I know that I mentioned earlier. I mentioned that obviously wealth. You let me try this in English. you you kind of portray that we all have kind of a sexual wealth, correct? That allows us to be our sexual being. How would you describe that when we talk about that kind of a wealth within ourselves? Because I think when we explore, and again, please help me out here, when we explore our sexuality in regard to, I've been married 35 years, and with a wonderful wife, and we have two wonderful kids, and my wife and I, we have overcome many things within our time period together, because there were things in her past, there were things in my past that tried to interfere with our relationship, but from a sexual perspective. So we as individuals, through that journey, we have found that it is a valuable asset to have communication in regard to that. So how can we, in any relationship we have, you don't have to be married, you can have a partner, you can have, just as an individual, how can we understand the wealth that we have in us in regard to our own sexuality, and how we utilize that, I guess.
Yeah. So the understanding is that for one, power or personal power, which most people don't understand what power really is, the perceptions we have of power in the government and in our society is really the energy of force. It's not true power, because power is very nourishing and loving. But our personal power, our sexual energy, and our wealth are all the same. They're all the same energies. And this is really beautiful to understand, because, again, what we're speaking to here is creative life force energy. So, creative life force energy creates everything, and we all have it within our bodies. And sexual energy is a type of creative life force energy. And so our personal power and our ability to create wealth, whether that is wealth of relationship, wealth, of course, of money, wealth of lifestyle, wealth of presence, right? Wealth of joy. Those abilities to truly create that are actually rooted in that creative life force energy. And so sexual power gives us a doorway into that. Just as you so wonderfully put, Michael, it gives us something to focus on, that we get to say, okay, what's showing up here, and how can I go about transforming this, alchemizing this, healing this? And we can absolutely do it with a partner. We can also just do it with ourselves, because all of the information that we hold is in our own bodies. And so when we explore just our own bodies, as well as our belief structures about sex, I used to get really, really triggered when people would talk about sex. I used to get triggered when I wanted badly to learn more about this stuff, but the idea of it used to really shut me down. So just even also contemplating, what are your beliefs about sex? Do you feel comfortable talking about it? Do you feel comfortable hearing about it? Right? What are all of the beliefs that you hold about your sexual power, your sexual energy, and sexual power, sexual energy at large? There's so much realization and self-awareness that can come through the doorway of sex that actually leads you into understanding your own personal power and your ability to create your life more clearly.
How about the journey towards wealth? I know it begins with a healing, and what you just spoke about is profound. Uh, can you give us some practical tips? I know we're going to talk. Obviously, you've got a coaching business. You've got an academy, so to speak, classes. Then you've got a podcast, and we'll talk about all that with so many things that can help people, including some free stuff that we'll get into here in a little while. But can you give us some practical tips on how we can recognize maybe that we're feeling shame about certain things, or because sometimes we don't. It took a long time for, like myself. It took me a while to figure out that I really come out. I'm ashamed of that, and I shouldn't be. And I was grateful enough to have a partner, my wife, that we could talk that out and we can get it worked out. Touch point. Her the same thing on the other end of it. She has something that she felt ashamed about in her past, and we were able to get those discussions. And I'm a firm believer in communication. Communication can solve so many issues and so many problems, and people are afraid to open that door, kind of a thing. But could you give us maybe a few practical tips or steps that we can do to recognize that might be the root issue of something, and how we can start to take steps towards relieving that?
Absolutely.
I, I
So
asked I
any
asked long questions. I'm sorry.
I love questions too. Questions are I'm all about it. So, our belief structures, everybody has beliefs. Everything in our reality, we have a belief about. We have beliefs about ourselves. We have belief about, our family, everything. And those beliefs, they can either be very expansive beliefs, like I am divinity, I am truth, I am a being of love, or they can be limiting beliefs that say I am not worthy, I am shameful, I, shouldn't exist, right? And those limiting beliefs are truly against who we truly are as divine beings. And I bring this up because this is where triggers come from. So when somebody says, hey, you said something that upset me, they're being triggered. It's really not about the other person. It's hint, it's never about the other person. It's really about your own wounding. So becoming familiar with what triggers you, what upsets you, what gives you this feeling of like, that doesn't feel good, or like gross, or I want to push that away, or like, I don't like that, or F that, or even rageful or angry or like passionate. These are all triggers, and we can feel them very much in our body, and they're very quick reactions. So, first off, understanding that that is what a trigger is, and 100% that trigger is in you. It has nothing to do with anybody else. It's a wound that you carry that somebody else just so happens to poke. So then you get to be self aware. So you get to go on a contemplative journey of asking yourself questions. Like I said before, what is my belief structure around sex? And say the word out loud. How do I feel about sex? How do I feel about my body? How do I feel in the act of sex? How do I feel about power? How do I feel about money? What if I had a lot of money and I was very, very wealthy? What is my belief there? How do I feel? What if I'm homeless and poor? What's my belief there? How do I feel? Right? What do I think? How do I feel about, orgasms and multiple orgasms? And what's the word where people are having like a bunch of orgasms together, right? Like, what are your beliefs? Just take yourself into all of these different spaces and ask yourself questions, because your body will react. And the things that you don't like, the things that don't feel good, the things that, you don't have to love this stuff. It doesn't mean that you should be able or want to go have sex with a bunch of other people, right? Like, that's not what I'm saying. But if the idea of having sex with a bunch of people triggers you, then there's something there for you. Because ultimately, it shouldn't have a charge at all. Just like, okay, great. Other people want to have sex with 20 people at a time. That's fantastic for them. I don't want to do that. But there's no charge in my body. It's not like, oh God, that's horrible, or oh, that's disgusting, or why would you ever want to do that, right? So having that awareness of self and taking yourself through these questions, because money is very, very triggering. And it is a form of wealth. Sex is very, very triggering. And so is power. How do you feel when you think of somebody misusing their power, empowering over you, you powering over somebody else? If you really sit down, you ask one question at a time, and I recommend saying it out loud, because your voice is very powerful to you. Your voice will trigger your body. And then just simply be the observer. No judgment. Just, what did I feel? Wow, there was a pang in my gut. or, oh, I feel a little bit disgusted, or I feel aroused, right? And just take note without judgment. You will have so much epiphany and self awareness.
I think that's brilliant words of wisdom. I think that the opportunity for us to be able to recognize that within ourselves, can allow us to move forward, at least within it, if I can say this, in loving ourselves, because I think we all should understand how to love ourselves in regard to even any relationship that you're in. You still have to love yourself first and make sure that you honor yourself from those perspectives. And yes, you have a door opening, and then you can step through that doorway, and I think, and then enhance your life in so many ways. That's where the wealth comes in.
Yes.
Yeah, I can see that. I can understand how that works together now. Do you think honoring our sexual essence, do we have ways that we can honor our sexual essence? Do we all have a sexual essence?
That's a really beautiful question. Absolutely. And, one of the ways that we can honor our sexual essence is through fantasy. And fantasy is one of those things where, and I mean sexual fantasy, because we can have all kinds of fantasy, right? But we're talking about sexual essence here. Sexual fantasy, there's purpose behind it. And a lot of times, there can be a lot of shame held there. And it's really important to know, and I'm going to say something that could be very triggering. So I just invite everybody to receive this information. There are a lot of sexual fantasies that are completely benign. And then there are sexual fantasies that maybe if, our society doesn't deem that appropriate or okay. But the thing about a fantasy is you can be in the fantasy, you don't have to act upon it. And the energy of that fantasy will unravel you if you really spend time, again, of a place of loving awareness towards yourself in that fantasy, right? Just in the energy of imagination, you can really come through. It's generally a very karmic healing that you need to go through that imagination and that fantasy to really come down to the terms of your true sexual essence. So fantasy, if it's something that is safe and is appropriate, we can absolutely play it out with ourselves and with other people, making sure that it's a safe space. And if it's something that seems inappropriate, not safe, then we can absolutely play that in our imagination. There's no harm there. And you will learn deep, deep truths about yourself that are profound and activating.
Amazing steps. I think that, thank you. That was a wonderful opportunity for us to kind of have a better understanding of the connection that we need with ourselves and with others, that we can help them forward. Do you, excuse me, and I don't know if I read this on your website, a shame-free heart is a fertile ground for prosperity?
No, but I love that.
In my research, I found that. But I think it fits, because I think that, again, we feel shame in many, many different ways. We could feel shameful for not saying I love you when somebody walks out the door. We could feel shameful for something that we did the day before. I either, I don't drink, but I drank too much, or, I did this too much, or did that too much, or come in too late, or whatever the case may be. Shame, I think, is an inherently built within our DNA. It's always, if you do something wrong, you should be ashamed that you did something wrong. That's been built into us for thousands upon thousands of years. When it got to the sexual aspect of it, I think that, in my opinion, became more religious. And that's just my opinion. I'm throwing that out there. Do you feel that, with that statement, that a shame-free heart's a fertile ground for prosperity, if we can understand the differences, or figure out, let me start over, because I got my brain's moving like 100 miles a minute here. So do you feel that if we can understand the difference in that shame and how it applies to us, even from a sexual perspective, that we can separate those shames, or those, because I think we all should have at least some. Look, I was a cop. Uh, Consequences for actions in so many things. From a legal perspective, you were speeding, or you assaulted somebody, or you stole something from somebody, or you not to go that far, but you drove while you were drunk, or you unfortunately there was a homicide involved or an assault involved. I think that a certain amount of shame should exist within our lives because, from that perspective, you need to understand that there's consequences for our actions, and that you should feel shame for those kind of actions. How do we separate that?
I completely disagree. So there's a
And
difference
walk.
between taking responsibility for your actions and holding yourself accountable. But you don't have to do that from the vibration of shame. Shame is the lowest vibratory emotion we carry. It's close to death. It is debilitating for the body. It causes disease.
Okay.
So I don't recommend anybody to shame themselves, but take responsibility and accountability for your actions.
Okay.
Absolutely. But you can do that from a place of love. And, perhaps this is radically misunderstood in humanity because what happens when we shame ourselves is we actually create a cycle where we now feel bad. We feel bad about who we are, and we tend to continue, even on a smaller scale, those actions that are not serving us, are not serving our loved ones, are not serving humanity. But when we learn to accept, okay, I did that, I take full responsibility for that, and I am loving myself, releasing myself, forgiving myself, and accepting myself, you transform those energies. That's known in like AA and Alcohol Anonymous, and the way that we have to move through these patterns with ourselves. If we continue to hold ourselves in the energy of shame, we continue to facilitate those patterns or other patterns. There are tribes where when somebody does something wrong, they bring that person in front of the community and they all tell the person how much they love that person, how much that person has done for everybody else, because love is transformative, not shame.
That was a good question. That was a
It was a
great
really
answer.
good question.
Great answer. So when we talk about the wealth within ourselves in regard from sexual energy, our sexual energy isn't just about our pleasure, correct? It's about the potent force that fuels creativity, vitality, and manifestation. And I think that from that opportunity, can you help us understand our sexual energy from that perspective?
Absolutely. I'm really glad you brought that up because oftentimes people think that when I'm talking about sexual power, it's all about having sex. And actually, you can be 100% in your sexual essence, in your sexual power, and not be in the act of sex. It really has nothing to do with the act of sex. That is just one expression through which we bring that forth. But the sexual energy in ourselves, first and foremost, it's about really allowing ourselves the energy, the experience of pleasure. And again, that we are creator beings. We are creating our reality, and that we can use that creative life force energy to create our reality. Our society is deeply ingrained right now and programmed in you got to grind. You got to perform. You got to do these things that are not fun just to get by. And I deeply believe that we're moving into an era of pleasure where we get to say, you know what? I want to do this because it lights me up. I feel the passion of it. It fuels me. That's why I want to do it. And that's working with our sexual power.
See, that works. I think it's ironic how I see these parallels. I grew up in the '60s and '70s, and obviously the '60s and '70s were the hippie version of our culture for quite some time here, and the free love and a little bit of all of that involved. I won't go into a lot of detail, but it kind of parallels a little bit of that, and I think that we all need to get back to understanding that we are human beings and that we have the opportunity to enjoy ourselves. It's not a task. It's not just for procreation. That it's again to have intimacy with our partner and to have the opportunity to get closer. And again, this is my opinion. Closer to our partners. It gives us the communication to have a deeper understanding of each other. from all of those aspects. When you connect with somebody on a deeper level, in especially from that perspective, I feel that it brings us closer together, and that love grows even more so. Do you think there's a because you had just mentioned that you think we're coming more to this? Is there a paradigm shift across society and culture you think that is moving in that type of direction?
Absolutely. I believe very much that we are awakening to deeper truths about who we really are, beyond just our human form and beyond this one incarnation. And part of that is understanding that we are creating our reality. And part of that is, coming more into that union of self, the deeper self, the divinity of self. And we do that, one of the ways is, through our sexual energy. That's why
Mm.
Tantra exists. Tantra isn't really about sex, it's about awakening. And again, sexual energy, it's not even about having a partner. Like it's about pleasure. Like we can have pleasure right here talking. I feel pleasure in my body when I'm speaking truth and talking. I can feel pleasure when I'm out walking on a trail, and I can lighten my body up with sexual energy just simply walking through Mother Gaia. Like we need to understand that, sexual energy isn't just in the act of sex, and pleasure isn't just in these specific moments that we grant ourselves permission, that we can activate this in our body and experience all the time, even when you're doing your taxes.
Oh, I might differ with that one, but
I've done it.
oh, I may have to ask you how, because boy, I hate taxes. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, it is. I know that you had in several other conversations that I have heard you in. You talk about a very powerful story that you have in regard to an awakening, such as that, because of what you just said, that you experienced some things that it was full body, and you were driving, right?
Yeah, it had nothing to do with sex. I was driving my car and I had this full body orgasm. And at the time in my life, I had never had a full body orgasm sexually. I found orgasm to be very, very challenging. And here I was in my car, full body orgasm, driving down the road. I pulled the car over, which maybe as a police officer, you'll be happy to hear
I appreciate that. Yes.
that. And I was luckily on a very, back road of like 35 miles an hour. So it was very minor, but that was one of my awakenings of the realization that, hey, this energy, I mean, for one, it's really beautiful to experience a full body orgasm, but that it's not just in the act of sex. It's actually, as we realize our divinity within, that's what causes those full body orgasms.
If I think that you mentioned something just a few seconds ago, tantra. Is that when they talk about tantric sex and they talk about tantra, the stuff that at least that I have been given the opportunity to understand is mostly from what I see on TV or something along that line, where this tantric sex is supposed to be this ultimate type of an act, an ultimate type of connection with somebody, but it can be done alone or it can be done with somebody. Can you help us understand what that is, if you don't mind?
Yeah. So again, it's not like Tantra and sex are the same conversation. Tantra is a teaching of using our creative life force energy, our Shakti, and using our sexual energy in very powerful ways to heal our bodies, to create our reality. And the part that Western society has taken from tantric teachings is just the act of sex. So we've left the majority of the actual teaching behind, because tantra is really about weaving, is what tantra means, and it's about the weaving, the divine union that happens in and of self. And like you said, you can use tantra with just yourself, or you can have a divine union with your partner. It's where the masculine and the feminine unite. We all have masculine and feminine energies, and when we bring these together, I always say, where polarity meets, which is masculine and feminine, is polarity, God is revealed. So divine union is in that process of merging those polarities of self, so we really realize our divinity. That's the truth of tantra. And it does teach about sexual energy and sexual power. So, yes, there are teachings in the act of sex and how to deeply, deeply connect through that act with another and have that divine union with another. But that's not the foundation of Tantra.
I'm there. Thank you. I appreciate that. I think that we have a better understanding of what that happens to be. Forgive me while I readjust my earbud. Why is it imperative that we release shame and reclaim the innocence of our sexual selves? You spoke about innocence earlier, so I kind of wrote that down. That we're all innocent. I agree with you in this respect that you're. They say from a religious perspective you were born a sinner and this kind of a thing, and I think that it comes from the womb. Basically, we are taught that you're a sinner, you're a sinner, you're a sinner, you're a sinner. But I think it's imperative that we do release some of that shame. And how can we reclaim that innocence?
Yeah, it's truly liberation. When I saw that version of me, that 4-year-old self, and I truly felt myself just in this erotic energy with no understanding of it, absolutely, definitely no shame around it. I was completely liberated because it feels good to realize that we are naturally innocent. And what that does is, ultimately there's more than a polarity. There's actually a trinity. That's the mother, the fire, the father, and the child, the masculine, the feminine, and the child within. So when we reclaim this innocence, we are reconnecting to that inner child. We are reconnecting to our playfulness. We're reconnecting to our creativity. We're reconnecting to our imagination. And I think we could all really safely say that our society could really use a lot more of that child essence in all of us.
I agree with that. I agree, especially. I mean, today's world, at least at present, to a whole nother discussion.
Yeah.
Appears to be getting very lost in itself. And I think that we all need to take a break, take a pause, and kind of reach back out for that innocence so that we remember that we are a society and we all are one, and that we all come from the same source, and that we really need to recognize that we're all connected and be nice to each other. I know that how did you come about with you have excuse me, you have services and you have opportunity for people to get help in regard to their sexuality and to regard to their moving forward. Can you tell me a little bit about that and how somebody can get in touch with you?
Absolutely. So I have my podcast called The Ecstatic Woman, and it's all about activating, inspiring women in their power, in their authenticity, and in their bliss. And I have a variety of different programs. I have an academy, I have group programs, I have one-on-one. And really what I help people do is to create exactly what they desire, no matter the obstacles. So I work with people on first understanding what do they truly desire, because some people don't even really know the answer to that question. And then how do we very powerfully and magically go about really creating that? So that is my joy. And I also help women to conceive babies and retain that conception, because that's part of the creative process as well. And that brings me a great amount of joy and pleasure. And on my website, I do have a free ebook called Awakening Aliveness. And this goes into a lot of what we talked about today, about reconnecting to our bodies, just releasing some of that shame, dropping down some of the armor that we are using to protect us that actually holds us back, keeps us stuck in life. And so that's a free ebook for people to check out and, yeah, begin to kind of connect into my work.
And your website is www.alarasage.com. I'll make sure that is in the show notes for everybody to be able to click that and go. Now, you work with both men and women, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. I was working with men and women before, and then I started working with just women, and I just have always had men come into my space. So I just reopened that to really hold that container for both men and women.
Well, from the male perspective, I appreciate that. I think that we have a lot of work to do, and a lot of there's stigmas, I think, between today's men, women, anything with identity in regard to LGBTQ, any of those. I believe that society is starting to unfortunately fall back a little bit on what identity is really supposed to mean. And Again, another conversation. But at least you have an opportunity for people to recognize themselves and to appreciate themselves and to love themselves and to move that forward in a positive way. You're also on Instagram. Your Instagram is right there on the screen, Alara Sage, at Alara Sage, pardon me. Do you have any words of wisdom that you might share with everybody before we go? I said that wrong. One more thing before we go. Do you have any words of wisdom you'd like to share?
I just want to say that if this conversation has been triggering to you as the audience, then first off, I just express my compassion, empathy to you. As I mentioned, it would have been triggering to me as well before. And I just invite you to take a tiny step towards that trigger. Because wherever our triggers are, our fears, behind that, beyond it, is our most beautiful and expressive self.
Brilliant words of wisdom. Thank you very much. Alana, thank you very much for reaching out. I really am honored to have you on the show. Thank you for this conversation. It was an amazing opportunity for us to be inspired, motivated, and educated. I think that we can hopefully help somebody out there to understand they have opportunity. So thank you for being.
I'm so grateful for this conversation because it's people like you that hold these spaces that we get to have these tough conversations. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. We're here to help the world move forward in a positive way. So again, I'll make sure that everything is in the show notes for everybody, that you can connect with Alana, and you can follow. Just click on it and follow the link. And again, Alara, thank you very much for being on the show. I really appreciate you. One more thing before you all go, please like, subscribe, and follow. Tell your friends, all that good stuff. Have a great day. Have a great week. And thanks for listening and watching.
Thanks for listening to this episode of One More Thing Before You Go. Check out our website at beforeyougopodcast.com. You can find us as well as subscribe to the program and rate us on your favorite podcast listening platform.